Hello, welcome to FED Storytelling. How are you doing today? We are going to be reading the Bible. Then we are going to be doing the joke of the day.
Oh, you've got a joke of the day?
Mm-hmm. Then we are going to be doing the synopsis.
What?
Then we are going to be reading Mara.
I thought we'd do the joke of the day and then the Bible. Oh, well, you better come up with one since you already promised them a joke of the day. Okay, Mara, chapter 11, and he's going to go find you a joke for the joke of the day.
Yeah. I'm doing two things at once now.
And I'm getting messages. What are my messages? JJ, you have to come here if you're going to do the joke of the day. Hi, Mom. Who's our second? Okay, so here's the. Kimmy said it was her. Okay, here is the. There's the Bible. Oh, that's not the. No wonder it didn't look right. Okay, that's not what I usually give you, but it should be the ESV. So, yeah, normally I give you the Bible Hub, but I think this works with the YouVersion app. Anyway, JJ is trying to come up with a joke right now. No, I'm not going to read the Bible while you're trying to research a joke. We could start the live stream over if you, or we could just skip the joke of the day. Okay.
Why don't eggs tell jokes?
Why don't eggs tell jokes?
Because they will crack each other up.
They will crack each other up? Okay, so that's the joke of the day. Now we're going to read Galatians. Link is in your, whatever it's called, if you want to use it. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. All right, here we are. Galatians chapter 6. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor. For each will have to bear his own load. Let the one who is taught the word share all good things with the one who teaches. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption. But the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. See with what large letters I am writing to you with my own hand. It is those who want to make a good showing in the flesh who would force you to be circumcised, and only in order that they may not be persecuted for the cross of Christ. For even those who are circumcised do not themselves keep the law, but they desire to have you circumcised, that they might boast in your flesh. But far be it from me to boast except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, by which the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world. For neither circumcision counts for anything, nor uncircumcision, but a new creation. And as for all who walk by this rule, peace and mercy be upon them and upon the Israel of God. From now on, let no one cause me trouble, for I bear on my body the marks of Jesus. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you in spirit, brothers. Amen. That is the end of Galatians, and tomorrow we will start up with Ephesians. Like I said, we will be doing the General Electric Power Company. That's Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. And so we've got a little ways to go on that, and then we're going to jump to something in the Old Testament. And without further ado, here is the one and only Kimberly.
So what happened in the last chapter was basically Mara, she told the king what the other guy said to tell him.
The
And
Warhawk is coming.
Yeah, that. What Dad said.
Does anybody remember who the Warhawk is?
Nope, nobody said.
From the very, very, very first chapter, when he went to go meet that old general.
Oh, Mr. General guy?
Oh gosh. Remember he said you're not serving the Pharaoh, you're serving Egypt.
Oh yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
So then the king was talking with Mara, and she was pretending to interpret for the Babylonian princess, and they were like having a conversation, and she had to make up something like him having a headache because he looked so upset and everything. So
And what did Nile do? Or what did she suggest?
she suggested using poppy seeds to make some sort of tonic thing.
To help his headache.
Yeah, that's not there.
Yeah.
So then she had another one of these kind of conversations.
What did the king tell Mara that needed to happen?
He's gonna have a tomb robbed.
What tomb?
A king's tomb?
Well, yeah, a king's tomb. But which king?
I forget.
The king that would recognize that was as the true king, which was actually his father.
That's kind of, kind of dark for him. It's Egypt after all. They've done some pretty bad things.
Okay.
I mean, it's all in the past now, but yeah. So then what happened was she had another one of these conversations with somebody else. I keep forgetting his name. I'm sorry.
Sentry?
Yeah, I think that was it. And basically, the Babylonian princess basically kind of suspects Mara for doing this.
No, she's pretty sure that Mara is
Yeah.
But what did Nani want to do? She didn't want to go talk to them. To Sentry.
No.
She wanted to do. What did she want to do? She wanted to talk to the weaver woman.
Oh right.
That was in the courtyard.
Right.
Yep. Okay. All right. So, oh gosh. And Shintu, is that his name? I want to say his name. Chef 2, sorry. Chef 2. Well, we don't know what Chef 2 said because they were speaking in Egyptian, and that chapter was told to us from Inani's perspective. Rebecca, did you get to listen to the previous section? All right. Well, anyway, all right. So I'm going to just keep going here. We're on chapter 11, Night Ride. Now I have worn her out, Mara was thinking irritably, dragging her here and there, denying her even the small comfort of talking to that weaver. But how else could I have done it? I had to reach the garden, I had to. And now, great Amun, she must wait still another while before she might give Sheftu the king's message. If only she could have got it off her mind at once. But, of course, he was right. There were too many ears to listen in that place. She opened the gate and stepped back to let Inanni go through, checking off in her mind the instructions Sheftu had given her. This meeting had been merely to arrange for future meetings, since he dared not be seen with her often on the palace grounds. Tomorrow, he had said, she must contrive some method of slipping out secretly into the town by night, a means of coming and going whenever she chose through the palace walls. Tomorrow evening, a guide would await her at the shop of Nefer, the goldsmith, just outside the walls to conduct her to a place where she and Sheftu could talk in safety. She drew a long breath, followed Inanni and her women through the garden gate and between the stone rams that bordered the wide paved drive. One day was a short time in which to make such difficult arrangements. She had no idea how to begin. And she stepped into the drive. As she stepped into the drive, she noticed Inanni pulling her shawl over her face, hurrying past the sentry with averted head. She's afraid I will stare the fellow down again, thought Mara with a flicker of amusement. Glancing at the guard, she found him once more obviously admiring her. Suddenly it occurred to her that he might be useful, very useful indeed. She sized him up, reflecting. He was young, well favored enough to be easily flattered. Already his pacing had turned to a swagger under her gaze, and he guarded a gate which was apparently little used by the general traffic to and from the palace. Yes, it was worth a try. Mara gave him a melting glance, allowed a smile to play uncertainly about the corners of her mouth, then strolled after Inanni. Tomorrow evening, when he came on duty again, she would make his acquaintance. The incident restored her confidence. As they passed rapidly through the deserted court of the weavers and the string of little gardens and courts that led back to the stairway, she found her worries fading before a mischievous anticipation of tomorrow and her next encounter with the sentry. It would be amusing to wind him about her finger, exciting to venture for the first time into the streets of Thebes. As for the king's message, that concerned only Sheftu. Play your own game, my girl. But she had not finished her encounters for the day. She had scarcely bid Inanni good night and retired to her own room when a soft scratching sounded on the door leading to the corridor. Frowning, Mara went to open it. At once a Libyan in a slave's shenty pushed into the room and closed the door silently and swiftly behind him. "You're to come with me," he muttered. "Get a cloak." Mara's jaw set angrily. She had never seen the man before, but her dislike of him was instantaneous. Everything about him repelled her. His pale foreign skin and colorless hair, the one blind eye which showed milky blue in his callous face. Above all, the insolence with which he ordered her around. "Which devil's brother are you?" she spat at him. For answer, he reached into his sash and produced something which he held out indifferently on a hand like a chunk of beef. It was a scarab, identical to the one Mara's master had given her in Memphis. Sullenly, she turned to fetch a cloak. The Libyan pulled a fold of it half over her face before he motioned her into the hall. A few minutes later, they were passing down an outer stair and through a series of unfamiliar starlit courtyards toward what Mara's nose told her were the palace stables. They pushed through a row of acacia bushes and emerged into a stone drive. "Wait," grunted the Libyan. It was very quiet after the pad of his sandals died away up the drive. Mara could hear only the light breeze stirring in the acacia leaves, and, farther away, the gutturals of the stable boys and the occasional thump of a hoof. The sharp, clean smell of horses came strong to her nostrils, almost obliterating the fainter but ever-present fragrance of lotus that rose on the night air from 100 palace gardens. It would be nice, it would be lovely, thought Mara, just to stretch out yonder on the grass, with the stars thick up above and the breeze cool and nothing on my mind. Suddenly, she felt tired all through. Why did he have to send for me tonight? She thought. Tomorrow would have done as well. The silence was shattered as a chariot clattered into view around a bend in the drive. The horses came to a prancing halt just opposite Mara, and the Libyan motioned her in with an impatient jerk of his head. Reluctantly, she stepped up beside him and took a firm grip on the chariot's curving side. "Pull the cloak over your face," he ordered. With a crack of his whip they lurched forward. For the next few minutes Mara had all she could do to keep her footing as they rattled along at a furious pace, swerving presently into a wider drive lined with torches and alive with traffic. Other chariots hurtled past them, the drivers shouting and popping the whips, as was the Libyan. Half blinded by her muffling cloak and jarred to the bone, Mara had little chance to examine her surroundings, but she guessed the chariot was speeding down the great East Avenue toward the main gate. A moment later, they pulled up briefly under a glaring torch, and the Libyan muttered something to a man who stood there, a sentry, Mara imagined, though she caught no more than a glimpse of him. She had barely time to plant her feet and renew her grip on the chariot side when they were off again, whirling out of the palace grounds and through the dark streets of western Thebes. It was obvious the Libyan was accustomed to driving for great nobles, for he kept the horses at a full gallop, with arrogant disregard to comfort, caution, or the safety of occasional pedestrians who scattered like birds frightened from their marsh. Mara clung to the rail with arching fingers, hanging her ribs against the side at every corner and wishing her master and his surly Libyan at the bottom of the Nile. She was bruised and sore when at last the horses turned through a tall gateway into a dimly lit courtyard. Snorting and tossing their plumed heads, the beasts halted before a door that appeared to lead into the side wing of a large and impressive house. A groom appeared out of nowhere to take the reins, and the Libyan stepped down, pushing Mara before him. "This way," he said. She followed, too weary and confused to notice or care where he was leading her. Inside, the hall smelled faintly of wine and expensive ointments. She caught a whiff of baking pastry as they crossed a passageway. Far off, in another part of the house, there were sounds of music and merriment, as if a party were in progress. "In there," muttered the Libyan, stopping with a jerk of his head before an open door. She stepped into a small tapestry-hung room, and a tall, sparse figure rose from a corner to confront her. Involuntarily, she fell back a step. Her master's countenance had grown no more winsome in the hours since morning. "Insolent! Show more respect to your betters," growled the Libyan, nudging her forward again. She glared at him, but grudgingly moved her right hand to her left shoulder. The thin smile she remembered all too well from Memphis twisted her master's lips as he strolled toward her. "Docile as ever," he commented. "I see you have struck up a warm friendship with my servant Kadzar. Did you enjoy the ride?" "Enjoy," muttered Mara resentfully. "He drives as if the devourer were after him." Again the acid smile. "He has other talents too, especially with that whip he carries. It is well you came with him without argument." Mara preserved a sullen silence, mentally cursing him and his Kadzar and all their relatives in 2 languages. She felt wearier than ever. Perhaps he would let her sit down. Instead, he sat down himself, waving an abrupt dismissal to the Libyan. When the door had closed, he stated, "You have had an audience with the pretender." I, "What did you learn?" "Not of interest." "And why not?" His voice turned icy. "Take care, my girl," thought Mara. "You'd best bestir yourself and dance to his tune. You can be tired later." "It was no fault of mine, master," she explained in a more conciliatory tone. "Not even the cleverest spy can learn aught from an empty room. His Highness sent everyone away at once, save the princess and me." "Sent them away? If that is to be his habit, you'll be of small use to me. Nay, wait, it will not always be so." Really frightened now, Mara groped for an idea. No use to him? If he thought that, he might sell her tomorrow. Her mind full of unpleasantly vivid images, baskets of unironed shanties, shelves of forbidden food, the bite of a lash. She put all her persuasiveness into her voice. "Give me a little longer. It will not be thus always. The king cleared the room only because the barbarian was ill at ease. Next time, I promise, no such thing will happen. I'll see it to it myself. I can lead that maiden where I will." "So you say," he remarked. He was appraising her coldly and with doubt. "I swear it. Only let me show you." He was silent a moment, drumming his fingertips on the arms of his chair. "So they all left the room? Even the scribe?" "Aye, the scribe too." "The Kefs take their souls," he said with a quiet malevolence that chilled Mara's blood. "Hand-picked, every one of them, yet the fools are afraid of him. And someone's bearing messages." "They're all spies then," Mara thought. "The guards, the scribe, especially the scribe. I must be careful of him." Warily, she watched her master's granite face. The harsh line of his brow and nose waked a flicker of recognition in her, but she could not place what it reminded her of. Possibly some statue of a devil god in the temple of Memphis, she thought sardonically. Surely no other human had such a countenance. Who was he, anyhow? Someone who ranked high with the queen, for he had stood close to the throne this morning. Not so close as Sheftu, however. Only Count Senmut himself stood closer than Sheftu. Her master stirred in his chair. "Perhaps I will give you one more chance." "You think you can prevent Thutmose from clearing the room?" "I will do my best, master. Only try me. I see little else to do." "I will try you." He shot a venomous glance at her. "And I will know if you fail. Now listen. I realize you cannot discover the leaders of this accursed plot, but with any wit, you can find their messenger, or some news of where they met. I'm in haste, as I think I've made clear." Thoughtfully, he added, "And keep me a watch on the scribe." "With pleasure, master." Sorry. Easton! Dogs are a little bit distracting. He will also, she reflected, instruct the scribe to keep a watch on me. Very well, then. We are done. You have your chance. I trust you will make good use of it. It would be unfortunate if you should disappoint me again. He clapped his hands, and the Libyan appeared at the door. Muffling herself in her cloak, Mara hastened to follow him into the hall and out once more into the waiting chariot. Even the surly Chadzar was better company than the crocodile in there. On the ride back to the palace, the pace was as headlong as before, but Mara had learned better how to brace herself for it. And on this trip, something happened that furnished her considerable enlightenment. At the main gate of the palace grounds, the sentry had been changed, and the new one was apparently skeptical about Chadzar's credentials. There was a muttered argument growing rapidly angrier on both sides. Finally, Chadzar leaned half out of the chariot, brandishing his whip. "Fool and idiot! If you do not know the scarab, I'll wager you stand aside at my master's name. Nehera, the brother of Senmut, Now hold your tongue about it, but let me pass." It was the end of the argument, but Mara scarcely noticed the lurch as they plunged forward once again. Excuse me. So Lord Nahara was her master, own brother to Senmut, the architect, he of the deep-etched smile and avaricious eyes, who stood nearest Hatshepsut and her throne. It was easy now to place that fleeting resemblance to someone she had noticed in her master's face. It was no stone devil god, but Count Senmut, whose nose and brow traced the same harsh angle. In Amun's name, what hornet nest had she walked into that day in Memphis? Sheftu, the queen, the king, and now two devils instead of one to scheme with and lie to and walk in fear of. It would have been less complicated to stay a slave and iron shanties all her days. At the moment, her future did not seem half so pleasant and certain as it had this morning, and tomorrow night was beginning to loom in her mind again. Might it please Amun to make that sentry susceptible to blue eyes? At least, reflected Mara, as at last she climbed the stairs, to the welcome solitude of her own room, life was no longer in any danger of becoming monotonous. Part 4, The Inn. Chapter 12, The Sentry and the Gate. It was the next night. The sun had dropped into the hills behind Hatshepsut's temple 3 hours since, and the late moon had not yet risen. The palace driveway, known as the Road of the Rams, was shrouded in darkness. Near the tall bronze doors at the end of the drive, a torch sputtered and smoked in its bracelet, shedding its orange light down upon the sentry who lounged, yawning, below it. Mara, concealed in the shadowy gateway leading to the court of the weavers, had been watching him for some moments. He was the same who had grinned at her last night when she passed through with Inani. So far, so good. But had his mood changed? Perhaps tonight he would be surly if he had not lost at his gaming with the stable boys, or been reprimanded by his captain for some mistake or other. Well, it was a chance she had to take. Glancing behind her once more to make sure the court of the weavers was as empty as the drive, she wrapped the folds of her cloak half over her face and began to sob softly. After a moment, the guard became aware of the sound. She could hear the faint clatter of his sword as he straightened and prayed Amun he was not the type to shout out a challenge. No, over the cloak's edge, she saw him frown this way and that into the gloom, then pick up a hand torch and thrust it into the flame of the larger one. As he started down the drive, holding his light aloft, she increased her sobs, leaning against the gateway as if oblivious to all the world. An instant later, the torch shone full in her face. She gasped and opened her eyes wide, letting the cloak fall as if by accident. To her satisfaction, the glowering visage of the other side of the torch relaxed into a grin of surprise. "Well, by the caw of my mother, it's little Blue Eyes. Why do you weep? You were smiling last night, eh? Weren't you?" He might be Canadian, I'm not sure, eh? I don't know, Captain. Aye, you were, and at me. Now what's the trouble? It's nothing. Then dry your tears. He picked up the edge of her cloak, and with a man's amused tolerance, dabbed at her eyes with it. She permitted herself a brave little smile. There, that's better, he told her. You're too pretty to be sad. You're very kind, Captain, she murmured, trying her best to blush shyly. The sentry really did blush a little. Come, maid, I'm no captain, only a second sentry at a gate Pharaoh never uses. They keep one such as you, only second sentry? Aye, they do. Too young for a good duty. they'll keep telling me. The devil! I'll wager I can thrust a sword as smartly as those mummies at the main gate. Perfect, thought Mara, young, naive, bored with his duty, and vain of his muscles. I'll vow you could indeed, she said admiringly. Why, they are treating you unjustly. Youth only enhances a strong arm and a handsome appearance. No doubt they are jealous, Rished, son of Satek, the stonecutter. Rished, said Mara softly. She gazed up, wide-eyed, into his face, then allowed her lashes to sweep down against her cheek. He swallowed audibly, moving a little closer to her. Amen. Do you live in the golden house, Blue Eyes? I never saw you before yesterday. By my caw, you're a pretty thing. You speak with a tongue of honey, Sentry. Aye, but what use to be pretty when I am sore at heart? Oh, Gebu, my poor Gebu. She turned aside, sobbing again, one hand palm down on the top of her head in the attitude of mourning. As she had hoped, he extinguished the glaring torch out of respect for her grief, then stepped even closer. Come, what ails thee, little one? Who is this Gebu? Alas, he is my brother, alone and sick unto death in the city out yonder, while I must stay here within these walls. He is all I have in the world, and I cannot even go to nurse him. Ay, poor little maid, who keeps thee prisoner? I serve the Syrian princess, and must stay beside her, but she sleeps like one dead. There is no need for me to be at all in the night. There is no need for me at all in the night. I could go each night to Gebu if only, if only. Her sobs broke out afresh. If only what? Murmured Rished. He patted her shoulder. His arms went about her tentatively, casually. Still weeping, she just as casually slipped free. If only I could pass through that gate. In secret. No one knowing or being responsible, save myself. Even the sentry's back would be turned. Now it was she who moved close to him, one hand on his forearm. It was you I thought of, I confess it. When you smiled at me last night, you seemed so kind. Her voice added much to the word. But of course I was wrong. I hoped for too much. You could never let me through the gate, even with your back turned. Your captain would be angry and perhaps would punish you. She turned away, but he drew her back, his arm no longer tentative. Who fears the captain? Not I, pretty one. You mean you would, that it is possible? I mean, we might bargain a little. What would you give me if I turned my back? Give you? But I have no gold. He gave a low laugh, tightening his arms. I don't want gold, little Blue Eyes. Then indeed I know not. Nay, let me go. She dodged his kiss expertly, wriggling away to shrink against the gate as if in fright. You are too bold. Nay, come no nearer. Please, Rished. He stopped, laughing again. What's the harm in a kiss? None, perhaps, but such haste is not seemly. Why, I only this evening learned your name. Oh, that's it. Then let us get better acquainted. His voice held bravado, but was a little uncertain all the same. He reached out for her hand and drew her gently, she noticed, out of the shadows. Don't be afraid of me, he said awkwardly. Mother of heaven, how innocent he is, thought Mara. Standing beside him in the roadway, she smiled forgiveness. I'm not afraid of you now. Perhaps. She hesitated then, as if overcome by shyness, started along the road toward the big bronze doors. He fell in eagerly beside her. Perhaps what? Perhaps I was only afraid of my own feelings. Ah, were you? But when we're better acquainted. Already he wore the expression of one diving headlong into an acre of feathers. He waited until they stood under the torchlight, then faced him, slanting a look at him from under her painted eyelids. Why, then I might be more afraid than ever. I believe I had better bid you goodbye right now. Goodbye? But I thought you, no matter what you thought, I've changed my mind. You're an overbold young man, coaxing a maid with your honeyed words, trying to kiss her the first moment. Nay, touch me not, you wouldn't dare. I'm going back to the palace. She whirled to run, but he caught her angrily about the waist. And what of our bargain? I'll teach you to play with me, my little... Mara suddenly stopped struggling and relaxed against him. I was only teasing. Please loosen your arm a bit. I'll bargain with you if you promise not to frighten me again. I swear I will. Don't scowl at me, please. He stared down at her, tilting her chin up with his knuckles so that the torchlight shone full on her face. By all the gods, I never met a maiden like you, he muttered in bewilderment. You make a man's head swim. Rashed, sweet Rashed, are you really going to let me through the gate? I shouldn't, but you will? Not so fast. I have my price. I must see you again. But to be sure, when I go again to visit my brother. I want more than that, you minx. Look you, I'm off duty 3 evenings each month. Will you meet me, perhaps? I? On my next holiday, 7 nights from now, perhaps, breathed Mara. He bent suddenly to her lips, but she dodged him by an inch, lifted the great latch on the doors, and slipped through into the street beyond. Leaning in again, she lifted one hand and stroked it lingeringly down his cheek. My thanks, dear Rashed, she whispered. I'll rap 3 times when I come home again. Leaving him gazing after her, bemused, she hurried away into the darkness. He was gone from her mind before the doors closed. How black it was after the glare of the torch. She could barely make out the thin, tall trunks of the palms which lined the avenue, though when she looked straight up, she could see their plumy heads outlined against the stars. She must go east along the palace wall, Sheftu had said, and when the wall curved south, cross the avenue to the shop of Nefer, the goldsmith, someone would be waiting. Who? She wondered as she sped east on the silent sandals. Would she have to identify herself again? And if so, how? The gods be thanked, the granite-faced one had no suspicions of her. He could bait a deadly trap for her tonight if only he knew. Here was the curve of the wall. Mara appeared ahead, wrapping a fold of her cloak over her head and the lower part of her face before she slipped up across the deserted avenue. Gaining the shelter of a clump of trees, she saw before her the dim front of a building cut by one black rectangle, a deeply recessed doorway. Just above it, she could barely make out the hieroglyph for Nefer, traced upon the earthen bricks. Cautiously, she moved toward it. There was no sign of anyone, no sound, only that waiting black square, as if it were a trap. Anyone, anything might be concealed yonder. She hesitated a long, reluctant moment before deciding that there was no way to try the snare save by walking into it. She cast one glance behind her, then darted into the doorway. Darkness closed over her. She stood a moment with beating heart, then began to move forward, gingerly exploring with one outstretched hand the cool, rough bricks that formed the wall. There was no sound at all, save her own uneven breathing. Was she alone then, expecting at any second to touch the smooth wood of a door? Her hands suddenly met air instead, and after a few more paces, she realized the passage had opened out into some different place. She halted uneasily, trying to make out where she was. A breath of night air touched her cheek, accompanied by a whispered rustling overhead. She was perhaps in a courtyard canopied by a thatch of dried palm leaves. She saw the outlines of the walls now, and here and there around them large rounded objects, almost indistinguishable in the gloom. She was peering warily toward one of them When a pebble rolled behind her, she whirled. Someone, something, was standing beside the wall yonder, a shape of denser black among the shadows. In panic, she shrank back toward the passage from which she had come. Same difference. Then the figure moved too. There was something familiar about that bulky outline, the set of the shoulders. "Is it you, little one?" came a low rumble. "Nakonk?" Almost stumbling with relief, she darted toward him. "Hist! Not a sound, maid." He materialized beside her, comfortingly solid, and she felt her arm grasped. "This way. We'll talk later." She had never she had never been so glad to see anyone. She clung to him with a rush of affection that surprised even herself, feeling him an old friend, her only friend in a chancy, friendless world. This was a weary life for all its splendor, playing with fire day after day, trusting no one, deceiving all, staking everything on the nimbleness of one's wits. For a moment, Mara longed to be back in the marketplace at Memphis, with no more on her mind than snatching a honey cake. But only for a moment. She hurried after Nakonk. "What was that place?" she whispered as they emerged into a street. "Those great humped things about the walls?" "Humped? Oh, those were the furnaces, where the gold is melted. We were in Nefer's outer workshop. Here, into the alley now." He led her across the street and into a narrow lane between dark warehouses. Stumbling over the invisible rubbish, Mara spat out her annoyance, then laughed under her breath. "Aye, it's good to speak my mind when I feel like it. I've behaved so priggish of late, I'm like to smother of my own mincing and mouthing. Captain, where are we going?" "To Thebes, to a tavern on the waterfront. So you're weary of your fine life already, eh?" "Not really. It's good to eat all you can hold and order slaves about, but my tongue's tired of its leash. I'll wager it had to wag some to get you outside those walls tonight." "Nay, not overmuch," she evaded. They stepped out of the alley into a jumble of low buildings, sheds, and boathouses. "I smell the river," murmured Mara, drawing a long breath of the familiar, heady reek. A moment later they rounded the corner of a deserted fish stall, and the Nile lay before her, stars bobbing all along its darkly rippling length. "Do we go across, Nakonk?" "Aye. There's a boat waiting yonder." He led the way southward along the steep embankment, for the river was sinking lower in its yearly rhythm, and made for a tall stone image some forgotten pharaoh had erected to its glory there on the shore. At the foot of the image, moored irreverently to one granite toe, lay a fishing punt. Nakonk grunted something into the darkness beside the statue, and a stooped figure emerged, hobbled around to the mooring rope, and silently motioned them into the boat. "Who is he?" muttered Mara into Nakonk's ear as the boatman's oars thrust them out into the stream. "A papyrus cutter called Ankh, who's too old to earn his coppers in the usual way. You can trust him. He'll be here every night in case you need him." "And will I need him often?" "That's up to Hail. Hi, sorry, it's hi with an exclamation mark. It looks like hail. Hi, I near forgot to warn you. Never mention our master's name at the Inn of the Falcon. He's known only as Sashai." So Sheftu wore a disguise even among his followers. Sashai, the scribe. "Does no one know him save us, then?" Mara asked incredulously. "Only a few. The rest think him a messenger for some higher up who's the real leader. He wants it that way, girl. Watch you don't spoil it." They fell silent as a barge passed near them on its way to a belated mooring. Its torches threw puddles of molten gold on the black water, and the voices of two oarsmen quarreling sleepily drifted back on the night air as if slid away downstream. A moment later, the fishing punt was bobbing across its wake, angling slightly to the south to avoid the great dark hulk of a vessel standing far out to anchor. Beyond it rode two others, swaying gently in the current. More and more loomed up as the punt neared the wharves until it was threading its way among hulls close crowded on every side. At last it bumped to a halt against a ladder. The ancient Ankh held it there, while Nakonk and Mara scrambled cautiously along its rocking length and up the water-soaked rungs to the dock. A few minutes later they were in a street more crooked, dark, and evil-smelling than any in Memphis, lined with cracked walls and murky doorways, from which an occasional cloaked figure emerged to brush past them into the gloom. "This is Cutthroat's Alley, for certain, little one," muttered Nakonk, whose hand was ready on his dagger. "Take care you keep your wits about you, and a good blade, too, should you pass this way alone. Here we are, through this door now." He pushed open a creaking door like all the rest, save for the weathered wooden image of a falcon swinging from a bar above it. Within was a small courtyard, dimly lit by a flare bracketed beside another door at its far end. They made their way over rough cobblestones, past a single scrubby dom palm to the tavern's entrance. Nakonk rapped, and the door swung open. That is the end of chapter 12. Let's see how long chapter 13 is, because we're already at 46. And I think it's too long to read. It's like 17 pages. So yeah, that's too long to read this late into the thing. And I apologize for starting so late, but I hope you're enjoying the reading of Mara, Daughter of the Nile. And we will continue this reading again tomorrow night. Sorry, it's not even new now. It's pretty old. But God bless you, and we will see you again tomorrow. Good night.